Coming up, remember before that fateful referendum when we were told that Brexit would cut immigration, that we would take back control of our borders and the number of people coming to this country? Nigel Farage telling us that voting leave would mean fewer foreigners, fewer low-paid workers, more British jobs for British people. Well, 5 years on, a net migration to Brexit Britain is still sky high by historical standards, and the dysfunctional and expensive asylum system is still in crisis. Stay tuned. Let's start with the elephant in the sinking dinghy: irregular immigration. Never really a thing before leaving the European Union also meant leaving the Dublin Convention, which had allowed us to return irregular migrants to the first EU country of entry. Thanks to Brexit, the resulting small boats phenomenon continues to dominate the headlines. Nigel Farage pushed for Brexit under the pretence that it would restore control to our borders. It didn't. What Brexit actually did was end the free, legal movement of people, along with goods and capital, something that had benefited British people just as much as Europeans. In its place, irregular migration. It was all so predictable to anyone paying attention. And let's face it, the majority of voters on both sides of the Brexit debate had never given much thought to it prior to the referendum campaign. Which is why Cameron's decision to hold it was probably the most damaging political decision since the Suez Crisis in 1956. Immigration hasn't fallen since Brexit, it's risen. Well, surged might be a better word. It's hit record highs since Brexit. Net migration in 2022, 764,000, doubling from the year before Brexit. 2023, 860,000. Now, before we take a closer look, please remember to give this video a like, check that you're subscribed to the channel, leave a comment below and share a link on your social media. Access to my videos will always remain free, but if you do want to support the channel further, you might think about joining the membership program, which offers perks like early access to my videos, members-only content and priority replies to your comments. There's a link below for further details. After over a decade of the Tories withdrawing regular asylum routes and deliberately underfunding claims processing, we now have a Frankenstein's monster of an immigration policy. Fewer EU workers in care homes, farms and kitchens, more red tape, more costs, and as a result, increasing exploitation of workers from outside the EU. Severe labour shortages still exist in many sectors. The NHS can't fill roles. British universities teeter on the brink of bankruptcy. Starmer's 2025 Brexit renegotiation with the EU gives us a modest reset that's eased trade frictions and re-established some cooperation with the EU, but it falls far short of reversing the economic and social damage of the original Brexit deal, and does nothing to sort out the mess that our immigration system is in. The Labour government got off to a great start, scrapping the Tories' cruel and performative Rwanda scheme that saw hundreds of millions of public pounds torched on PR stunts and empty planes. A flagship Tory policy designed mainly to out-Farage Farage in some sort of sadistic scapegoating race to the bottom. Labour did the right thing ending that farce, of course, but they've replaced it with a little tinkering of immigration policy, mainly some border tech contracts, some small change spent in connection to their smash the gangs soundbite, and a grim insistence on deterrence rather than a fair and sensible system to accept an economically and socially justifiable number of migrants each year to address the problems caused by our ageing demographic in Britain. This week, we even had Starmer announcing a more transactional approach to immigration, whereby if a country accepts returns of their deported nationals who came here through irregular routes, they'll be granted more visas for their nationals to come here conventionally. Keir Starmer is scared stiff to even float the idea of a return to safe and legal application routes for asylum seekers. He still parrots Tory-era language about secure borders, much like his Chancellor parrots the old failed Tory fiscal rules. Labour, so far, seems more focused on attracting potential Reform 2025 limited voters than on actually coming up with a truly transformative approach to sensible immigration policy. While Westminster panics about polling as Farage and his latest vanity project, Reform 2025 Limited, remain some 3 points ahead of Labour, the real consequences are being felt all over the country. Government figures show a 70% collapse in migration from the EU since the referendum, and that means understaffed hospitals, nurseries, warehouses, farms and restaurants. Entire sectors suffering because ideology trumped reality. As a result, we now rely almost entirely on non-EU workers. In 2023, 91% of work-related migration was from non-EU countries. Nigeria and India topped the list. Now, I make no value judgments about that at all, but I'm pretty sure I know how your typical Brexit voter feels about this situation, which would go something along the lines of, "This isn't the Brexit I voted for," with the edgelords among them trotting out the line about this somehow all being the fault of Remainers and use of the tautology of a Remainers Brexit, whatever that means. You know the type. It would all have been sunlit uplands and unicorns if only ... Meanwhile, in the first half of 2024, over 8,000 EU citizens were refused entry at the UK border. Many had jobs lined up. Some were long-time residents caught out by Brexit paperwork. This is Brexit Britain emulating Trump's America, where a French schoolteacher can be locked in a detention centre for not having the right email from her employer. And through all of this, Farage and the right-wing media, in which I include the BBC, Sky and ITV, screams about small boats as if they're the main issue. Yes, irregular migration needs managing. I would agree that in some ways it is a form of queue jumping. Except, right now, there is no orderly queue, no regular method of applying for asylum for the majority of asylum seekers, thanks to 13 years of Tory closures of regular migration routes. That and Brexit gave rise to the small boat crossings in the first place. But it's not the main driver of net migration, and it never was. Take a look at this graphic, which shows the scale of irregular entry compared to the main categories of regular visa. But that hasn't stopped the right-wing media from using desperate migrants as political cannon fodder. Brexit turned a functional, if imperfect, system into a shambles. It hit the economy, affected families and harmed individuals' careers, and still didn't reduce immigrant numbers. It was all about votes, pandering to the very worst of human nature, and pinning the blame for all Britain's ills, not on rising wealth inequality, not on austerity, not on the mega corporations making obscene profits as workers' rights were eroded by the gig economy, but instead redirecting voter anger onto foreigners and especially onto the EU. And now Farage wants to maintain this misdirection of anger from inside Downing Street. I can easily imagine a Prime Minister Farage backed by a thuggish Reform majority in the House of Commons signing off on a state of emergency to replicate Trump's Gestapo-style raids, a new immigration force grabbing random people off the street on the basis of their skin colour. The very same charlatan who was instrumental in delivering a Brexit that overwhelmed the UK immigration system is now thrusting himself forward as the solution to the very problems he caused. Nigel Farage, the arsonist who'd have you believe he's a fireman. His populist anti-immigrant rhetoric is polling well, so cowardly politicians in other parties are too scared to tell the truth about immigration, that as an ageing society we need migrants. So instead of building a fair, efficient and humane system, our leaders, both blue and red, pander to the same toxic populist myths that got us Brexit in the first place. This country instead needs an immigration policy based on facts, compassion and on the national interest. And until those in charge find the courage to tell the electorate the truth about immigration, the UK will keep lurching from Rwanda to return policies to border force reinforcements, ensuring that immigration continues to be perceived as an existential threat, and therefore playing right into the hands of Nigel Farage and Reform 2025 Limited.